following show contains adult content. It's not our intent to offend anyone, but we want to inform you that if you are a child under the age of 18 or get offended easily, this next show may not be for you. The content, opinions, and subject matter of these shows are solely the choice of your show hosts and their guests, and not those of the Entertainment Network or any affiliated stations. Any comments or inquiries should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening.
What's up, Antman? Rocking away over there, I see.
What's up?
Hey, it's hard not to rock out to life after this, right?
It is, right? Yeah. Hey, speaking of, I want to give those guys some love. I saw their Christmas message in our email. Did you see that?
I have not. Oh my goodness, I feel bad. I did not see it. I've been down with the COVID and
yeah. What is it? Pneumonia now? Is that what it's called? Pneumonia?
Yeah, when you get the pneumonia afterwards, it's rough. But
you need to write a new song. You need to write a new song called COVID Mona. I bet we could get the dudes we could get Life After This to do it.
Oh, definitely. Oh my gosh, let's start a new project.
Oh man, so 5 days until Christmas, right?
Oh gosh, don't remind me. Don't remind
me. Did you get all your presents wrapped?
No. Did I get all my shopping done yet? No. Do I even still have my decorations completely up yet? No. Oh, but we got time, and I'll make it happen because superhero moms they got it going on. They can do it.
Man, yeah. We skipped on the Christmas tree this year. We got all the presents. That's it. Like whatever. Nah. So we got a cool guest tonight, man. Mr. Howard Bloom. I'm yeah, Roxy.
Yeah. So I have to point out, I know we're music-based podcast, but he's done so much outside of the music realm that is what I'm into, the theories, all the impressive work that he does. So we'll touch base on that too for tonight's show. I probably could sit and talk to him for hours upon hours, but we only have a short amount of time in comparison to the amount we could speak with him. So I'm excited.
You know what though? Like, it's gonna be the best 60 minutes of my entire life.
Absolutely. So we got a comment here. We're gonna check that out. That's you.
That's me.
Yeah. Where's everybody at? Get in here. Come chat with us.
Yeah, we're going to be sharing this out all night long. So make sure we get this out there. So a lot of people are in practice. I talked to a few bandmates and a few other people that are getting ready for some shows. Just in case there are shows, they're prepping for shows. So
yeah, there's definitely much love to all the people who listen to us after the live broadcast. We do have an extensive amount of people who do that. So we appreciate everybody. We love all of you. Thank you for tuning in to RA Nation. Let's get on, the show on the road here. So Howard Bloom, oh my goodness, Howard Bloom. We're going to bring him in. And if you're listening, please ask questions. We've got lots of stuff to talk about. So the one, the only, the Howard Bloom.
It's a pleasure to see you both. And I'm so glad, Roxy, that you're recovering from the pneumonia.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So
before we went on, Antman was talking about how I started out of music and then moved into science. Well, there's a story I wanted to tell you. In 1995, when my first book was coming out, The Lucifer Principle, A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History, I had to write a bio. It was the first time I ever had to write one on myself. And I started putting down the various things that I had done, and I realized this isn't the bio of a real human being. This bio couldn't possibly be. It read like the delusions of a madman. And that was in 1995, 26 years ago. And the stuff that I've done since then is ridiculous. And basically, Antman, to give you one idea, I didn't start in music. I started in science. I was in my family's big living room one day. Nobody else was in the house. I was 10 years old. No other kid in Buffalo, New York, my hometown, wanted to have anything to do with me at all. One day when I showed up near a baseball diamond, while they were picking teammates, they saw me coming and they picked up all their equipment and moved to another field so I wouldn't be able to find them. That's how popular I was. And my parents wanted to have nothing to do with me for God knows what reason. So this book appeared in my lap and I opened it up and it said the first two rules of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the example of Galileo. It told the story all wrong. It said that Galileo would have been willing to go to the stake like Giordano Bruno and be burned alive in order to defend his truth. That wasn't true. The Pope was a friend of his and they cut a deal. And he agreed to abjure everything he'd ever done and say it wasn't true in order to get 9 years of house arrest instead of the stake. But the heroic version of the story, where he would have been willing to go to the stake to defend his truth, is what I needed to hear at the age of 10. And the second rule of science, the first rule is the truth at any price, including the price of your life. The second rule is look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. And it gave the example of Anton von Leeuwenhoek, the guy who invented the microscope, and discovered, looking at pond water, that we were sharing an entire world with microscopic creatures we had never known were there, ever. And we'd been sharing our world with them for as long as we'd been human beings. So those two rules grabbed me by the throat, and I got immediately into microbiology and theoretical physics. And I started reading 2 books a day, science fiction and science. And by the time I was 12, I was accumulating scientific credentials, which is absolutely ridiculous. I built my first Boolean algebra machine. I co-designed a computer that won some science fair awards. I was schlepped off to the University of Buffalo, the local hometown university, for a meeting with the head of the graduate physics department. And I was 12 years old at the University of Buffalo. And I'm sure that my mother had twisted arms to get me a courtesy visit. And there was supposed to be 5 minutes, but we spent an hour in his office because we were discussing the hottest scientific topic of the day, which was Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe. There was a guy named Fred Hoyle who was behind the steady state theory, and he knew in his bones that was the year he would defeat Big Bang theory forever, and no one would ever hear of it again. So we were debating, I and the head of the graduate physics department at the University of Buffalo were debating the interpretation of the Doppler shift and what it meant for these two theories. So we came out of his office after an hour. My mother must have wondered what happened to me. And he put his hand on my shoulder and stood behind me and said, you don't have to save for grad school for him. He'll get graduate school fellowships at any university he wants in theoretical physics. So, but at the age of 12, something else happened. And it was, I started at the age of 12 to realize I was an atheist. But I put, you know how you can put something aside in your mind, like in a little private closet, and even though it's there, you don't acknowledge it. And I couldn't acknowledge that because the first party I was ever going to be invited to in Buffalo, New York was coming up. It was my bar mitzvah, and I'd be getting presents. And if I acknowledged that I was an atheist, I couldn't go through with the bar mitzvah.
Right.
So I went through with the bar mitzvah, and I spent the next 2 months writing thank you letters to all of the people who sent me checks and presents. And then I was finally free to admit that I was an atheist. Now, that was in August. And in September, something comes up in the Jewish calendar. My parents were not observant or anything like that, but they were terribly intent on making sure they observed the high holidays. which come up in September. So they managed to get me into a suit for the high holidays. They managed to get me into their 4-door Fraser automobile. They managed to drive me all the way to Richmond Avenue, this gorgeous tree-lined street where the synagogue was, but the synagogue smelled like urine, unfortunately. And then I wouldn't go any further. So I was holding on to this sturdy American-made door frame of the car while my parents were trying to pull me by the ankles out of the car. And they were willing, and I had a sudden realization. Since I didn't believe in God, there are no gods under the earth, there are no gods in the heavens, but there were gods in this picture. Where were they? They were in the passion with which my parents were willing to shred my socks and drag me up the street like a sack of meat and permanently deform my face in order to go to this synagogue service. And if there were gods, if there were passions that deep in my parents, then those gods were certainly alive in you and me. So I went on a hunt. I mean, remember, the thing's right under your nose. You're supposed to look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before. Well, I realized that the things right under my nose were not under my nose. They were behind my nose. They were the gods inside of us. And I went looking for the gods inside as part of my scientific enterprise, as one piece of the package that came complete with microbiology, cosmology, theoretical physics, all that stuff. Because the obligation of science is to try to understand everything, absolutely everything through a scientific lens. But there are some things you have to experience before you can understand them. And so I was off on a quest for the gods inside, for the ecstatic experience, for the transcendent experience. And then when I was 16 years old, my parents were kind enough to send me to a small private high school because I wasn't doing well in grammar school, in public grammar school, for a simple reason. I was reading books under the desk. I wasn't paying any attention to the teachers at all. I wasn't learning where Kansas was or what a gerund was or any of the things we were supposed to be learning because I was too busy getting an education with the books under the desk. So my parents sent me to a private school with 66 acres of greenery where they felt I might be more comfortable. And what a blessing it was. It really was a blessing. But the problem was the same kids were there that had been in my public school. And they hated me just as much as they'd hated me in public school. But there's a weird thing about kids, teenagers. They will compete like crazy to be the president of the class and the vice president of the class and the treasurer of the class, all these honorific positions where you don't have to do anything. And the most popular kid gets to be president. The second most popular kid gets to be vice president. The most popular girl gets to be secretary in those days. And the most popular Jew gets to be treasurer. So needless to say, I was not up for any of those positions. I was the most unpopular kid in the class. But when it came time to doing things, these preppy, ever so socially competent kids who were scoring on dates and all kinds of crazy things I never got introduced to at all, when it came to really doing something, who would they pick? They would pick an outcast. Why? Because they didn't want to have to do it themselves. So they voted me the head of something called the program committee in my junior year. And every day, school started out with a school assembly, 45 minutes. And the whole school was there, you know, the freshmen, the sophomores, the juniors, the seniors, all of them. And my job was to program 2 of those events a week and to MC 5 of those events. So for the first 2 months, it was scary as hell. I don't know if you've ever had stage fright, but it's really excruciating stuff. And I went through that every day for 2 months. And then finally, I got as accustomed to stepping in front of an audience of 350 people every day as I was accustomed to breathing. And of course, for Roxy, breathing has been difficult recently.
Oh, yes, I can totally relate.
So at any rate, and then one day, so they kept me in this position for my senior year too, 2 years in a row, 2 years out of my 4 years in this high school. And one day the juniors came to me when I was a senior and they said, "We're having a dance. Could you advertise it for us?" And they didn't realize the outrageousness of this request. If there was a dance or social gathering of any kind anywhere in Buffalo, New York, I was cordially invited to stay as far away as possible, preferably Cleveland. And they wanted me to advertise a dance where I was going to be utterly shunned, where I wouldn't even dare approach the dance. So I decided to do something. God knows why. There was a turntable behind the stage. And I put a record on the turntable and with music. I don't remember what music. And I went on stage and I danced. Now, there's another irony here. Every 2 years, my parents would do something to try to make me normal. And it never worked. And one year, their project was to send me to dance school for a full year to learn the boxtrot, the waltz, all of those things.
The classics.
Yeah, and I couldn't learn any of those things. And I was so unpopular in that class that none of the girls would ever, ever, ever dance with me. And when the instructors took pity on me, they regretted it because I ended up mangling their toes by stepping all over their feet. So I went on stage to advertise a dance by dancing, and I can't dance. So none of the moves I made were anything you had ever seen before in your life because I can't do any of the moves you've ever seen. And apparently I looked like a Looney Tune drawn on a night when Chuck Jones, the guy who invented characters like Tom and Jerry, had just dropped LSD. It was crazy. So I saw the faces of the audience. I saw their eyes widen. I saw their pupils dilate. I saw the face of the girl who hated me most in the entire school melting. I saw them melt together into a common energy, like a big energy amoeba, like a giant aura. I saw it reach a pseudopod out to me, like a big tunnel. I had an out-of-body experience. I thought I was on the ceiling watching this whole thing take place. I watched that energy from the audience tunnel through me up to around my head, be utterly transmogrified, and flow back to the audience again through the next move that I would make. And then I saw their eyes widen even further. And it was here I'd been in search of the ecstatic and the transcendent experience, and I unexpectedly was having one. The gods inside had really not only taken over me, but taken over the audience. And then when the performance was over, the audience did something they had never done before in my time at this high school, and they would never do again. Not for football heroes, not for homecoming queens, not for anyone. They surged down to the lip of the stage as if they had practiced this all their life. And they picked me up off the proscenium and put me on their shoulders and carried me out of the auditorium. 350 kids who hated me. And they carried me up the walkway to the building above where we had our classes, and only then did they put me down. It was an astonishing experience. So here I finally, totally by accident, tripped in to the kind of experience that I'd been on the hunt for since I was 12 years old. The gods inside of us taking us over, and not just taking over you or me, taking over an entire 350 people at a time and giving them a common, you can't say interchange of energy. I mean, it's a common feedback loop of energy. And that would become the key to my work with rock and rollers, because we'll skip over a whole lot of stuff. I stayed very focused on science, but when I was 12 years old, one day a girl in class turned her eyes in my direction. And surprisingly enough, that had never happened to me before. And then she did something even more startling. She made eye contact. And she said, "I told my mom you understand the theory of relativity." Well, in those days, only 7 people in the world could understand the theory.
Yeah, that was not a dinner conversation. I mean, it's hardly today, but definitely not then.
Right. And so I couldn't confess to her that I didn't understand the theory of relativity, because the only thing I had going for me was that the kids who otherwise chased me around and ignored me called me the sickly scientist. That was my only claim to fame. So as soon as school got out, I jumped on my bicycle. I went as fast as possible to the local library, where the librarians literally knew me better than my mother did, said, "Give me everything you got on relativity." They went through the stacks. They got out 2 books, a great big fat book by Einstein and 2 collaborators, a little tiny skinny book by Einstein himself. I put them on my bicycle clamp. I went home as fast as possible. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I started reading these books. And I had learned something at the age of 12. If you do things the hardest way possible, if you go through a book you don't think you understand one whit, by the time you get to the end of it, you've understood something in a way that you'd never understand from doing things the easy way. So I turned to the big fat book, which was all mathematical equations and only 7 words of English on a page. And I don't understand mathematical equations. I've never understood them. But I was plowing through that book and 8 o'clock came around and I was only 50 pages into it. And I didn't understand the theory of relativity. So I decided to give up and go to the little skinny book, because at 10 o'clock, my mom would put me to sleep. And if I didn't understand the theory of relativity then, I would be humiliated in school the next day. So I turned to the little skinny book, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience. It felt like the author had reached out through the page, grabbed me by the front of my shirt, and said, "Schmuck, listen up." The author was Albert Einstein. And what he said was, to be a genius, it's not enough to come up with a theory that only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and then express it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it. So I got a message direct from the pages of a book by Einstein that if I wanted to be an original scientific thinker, which is about the only thing on planet Earth I could ever possibly be, I was going to have to be a writer, and not just any writer, a delicious writer, a writer whose work people could not put down. So we'll skip forward. I dropped out of college eventually and accidentally found a movement, and it didn't have a name. And a year later, when I came back to the United States from 13 months in Israel, Time Life Publications had given it a name. It was the hippie movement. So my book about that is how I accidentally started the 60s. And Timothy Leary says it's a monumental masterpiece of American literature and filled with wow, woo, and aha experiences and nonstop waves of hilarity. Bless Timothy for saying those things. But fabulous. That's the book. So I ended up going back to NYU. And when I got out of NYU, I had graduate fellowships in neuroscience. By the way, neuroscience didn't exist yet. So I was going to have to paste the program together myself. But that's what I was going for at 4 different universities. But in my junior year, because I was obsessed with writing, remember, Albert Einstein had told me you've got to be a writer and a great writer. And I was in my junior year, and I was taking lots of poetry courses because I loved poetry. And the poet in residence at NYU one day said, "Bloom, wait for everybody else to leave the class. When they're gone, close the door, sit in that seat." Now, look, this is the bawling out seat he's pointing to. This does not sound good. So I waited until everybody left. I closed the door. I sat in the seat, and he said, "Look, you, last year I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year I am telling you, you are the literary magazine. You are the editor of the literary magazine. I'm giving you a budget. You don't even have a faculty advisor. The minute you walk out that door, you're it. Now get the hell out that door." Well, so I got out, I walked outside the door, and I stood in the corridor, utterly, I don't know, totally benumbed, because I hated literary magazines. That's why I never showed up the previous year. If you went into a room with a rip-roaring orgy and you put a literary magazine anywhere in the room, that room would empty out within 5 minutes. They're so fucking boring. I mean, they have these pale blue eggshell covers that put you to sleep. They have the most atrocious choices of typeface you've ever seen. They're just appalling.
Yeah.
So there I was standing in the corridor, looking serious, as if somebody had bludgeoned me. And a student I didn't know walked up and said, "You look troubled. Could I help you with something?" And I said, "Yes, I've just been named the editor of a literary magazine." And he invited me to come down for a cup of coffee. Well, I hadn't grown up among other human beings, so I didn't know what having a cup of coffee was, but I followed him obediently. And I had a glass of water, he had a cup of coffee, and over coffee and water, he asked me one of the most important questions of my life, which is if you could do anything you wanted with this magazine, what would it be? And I said it would be a picture book. He said, okay, go make it a picture book. So I gathered two staffs, a literary staff, and I gathered an art staff. And I turned it into this unusual format, 12 by 12 inch, because it was called the Washington Square Review, square format, big, full color magazine that just absolutely blitzed your eyeballs. And we made a huge smash. And one day I was told that I had been summoned to a meeting with the Student Activities Committee. Well, I didn't even know there was a Student Activities Committee. So I went to the room where the Student Activities Committee was supposed to be meeting, and they said, we loved what you did. We're doubling your budget for your second issue. Can you imagine? Nobody doubles budgets. Everybody decreases budgets, right?
Yeah.
So I had double the budget because we had created an absolute smash with this first issue. And with the second issue, I made it the sex and death issue. As soon as the literary staff saw the direction I was going, half of them quit. But, you know, without sex and death, how do you understand life, for God's sakes? And nobody on campus had a word to say to me about that second issue. One day I accidentally ran into the poet in residence who had not said a word. And I said, well, what did you think of the magazine? And he said, did you have to include that poem by your friend Jason Schneider that starts out with masturbation? But I got phone calls. Remember, you're in a university campus. All you really register is the university community. You're not aware of the community around you, even if it's New York City, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
So I got a call from the art director of Look magazine, which was this big, glossy, twice a month, gorgeous news magazine. I got a phone call from the editor of Grove Review, or the art director of Grove Review, which was the leading bohemian magazine in the world at the time. And I got a call from the art director at Boy's Life, which is the magazine you get, you know, great big full color magazine you get along with being a part of the Boy Scouts. And the irony there was I'd been thrown out of the Boy Scouts for incompetence at Morse code when I was 11. So
I only knew.
Yeah, so I had all these meetings, and then school ended, and my only purpose in life had been going to school. It was an artificial purpose that I'd adopted to keep myself from going insane. I was clinically depressed for the first 60 years of my life or so, and it kept me out of clinical depression. So I tried half-heartedly to kill myself. My wife had me put in a mental institution. They let me out for good behavior after 2 weeks. And now I didn't know what I was going to do for a summer job before I went to Columbia University to put together my own neuroscience program. And I walked into the apartment of the most brilliant of the artists that I had found for the magazine. And it was very strange. There was no furniture. There was a wall-to-wall carpet, but not a stitch of furniture. My artist, his wife, and his 3-year-old child were all on the rug crying. So I asked him what was wrong. And he said, well, we don't have money to pay the rent. They repossessed all of our furniture. We're about to be evicted from our apartment. They're cutting off the electricity. They're cutting off our phone. And I said, what? You are fucking brilliant. If I just, look, I haven't got a summer job yet. You just give me your portfolio. I'll take it out for 2 weeks. I'll get you enough money to pay your rent. And he said, no. If you're going to take my portfolio, you have to take the portfolio of my best friend too, because we came to New York City to found an art studio together. Well, his best friend's work was nauseating. But look, I got to save this guy's ass, right? I've got a humanitarian obligation here.
Yeah.
So I took out the work of his best friend and his best friend's wife, who actually was very good. And by the end of the summer, I hadn't gotten them any jobs. I'd gotten New York Magazine interested in doing a feature on our art studio, but hadn't gotten them a single job. And I am obsessive compulsive. And once I start something, I cannot leave it until I finish it. Plus, going to grad school at NYU looked like it was going to be Auschwitz for the mind. Why? Because look, I'm looking for the gods inside of us.
Right.
I'm looking for the transcendent experiences. I'm looking for those kinds of experiences that make new myths, that make new movements, that make the forces of history. I'm not going to find them in grad school. In grad school, I'm going to be giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students at a time in exchange for a psychology credit. And how many gods are going to come alive in those students? Zero. I will never see what I'm interested in my life. My life will be a waste and a wasteland. So at the end of the summer, I called Columbia and I said, I lied, totally against my ethos of the truth at any price, including the price of your life. I said, I've got a back problem. I'll be coming next year. And I stuck with it in the art studio. Meanwhile, if I was going to do an Einstein, if I was going to be an absolutely delicious writer, my next goal, because I'd been writing during summer vacations, during a summer vacation, I got a job writing for the Boy Scouts of America. Remember the irony, tossed out. And I wrote their handbook on stalking and their handbook on tracking, and then a book called 10 Steps to Organize a Boy Scout Troop, about how to organize a Boy Scout troop if you're in a town or a neighborhood that's never had one before. But the first assignment they ever gave me was they gave me the Boy Scout handbook chapter on masturbation, which had been written in the 1930s or 1940s, and said, don't do it because a hair 3 feet long will come out of your left palm and your eyeballs will fall out.
I remember that. Yes. I remember that from when I was a kid.
Right. So this chapter was not going to cut it with kids in the 1960s. So I rewrote the chapter entirely and said, don't do it because you'll feel guilty. So masturbation seems to have dogged my career. But one way or the other, so I continued with the art studio. In the meantime, I was co-designing my clothes. I mean, we were in the East Village, for God's sakes. There was a clothing designer 3 blocks away with a shop, and we co-designed clothes together. So I looked for absolutely every form of avenue that could use art. And a new magazine had come along. It was being bankrolled by Baron Woolman, the guy who bankrolled Rolling Stone. And it was an underground fashion magazine, and it was called Rags. And it was making a statement by having its office in a thoroughly industrial district that never had an office like this before, the Garment District. So I went over to show them our portfolio. And I took the freight elevator was this old creaky wooden thing, a cage lifted by chains. And I took the creaky old freight elevator, because it was the only elevator, this was an industrial building, up to the 3rd floor. And I stepped out of the elevator expecting that the 3 women in the office would gather around as I put my portfolio on a desk somewhere, and they would ooh and ah over the pictures, which were incredible. But that never happened. The minute I walked out of the elevator, the 3 women in the room's jaws dropped. I don't know if you've ever seen that happening in reality, but it does happen. And they said, where did you get these clothes? And I said, well, I'm co-designing them with this designer on the Lower East Side. And they said, do you have more of them? And I said, yes, I have a whole closet full of them. Why? They said, do you think you could write an article about them? Now, my whole aim was to take my writing to magazines, because that's where I felt I'd be forced to be as accessible as Albert Einstein demanded of me. And all of a sudden, I was writing an article for a magazine for the very first time. And then they made me a contributing editor, and I wrote 175 articles for them. And then another contributing editor started her own magazine, Natural Lifestyles, and asked if I would be a contributing editor to that. Meanwhile, there was a guy named Matty Simmons. And Matty Simmons had helped American Express invent a little something you might have heard of called the credit card. And Matty had made a lot of money. And Matty wanted more than anything else in life to be a magazine publisher. And Matty treated me as if I were his son. And one day he did something brilliant. There was a magazine that came out of Harvard once a year. And when it went on newsstands, which it did all over North America, it sold out in hours. So Maddie went up to the crew of this magazine and said, look, I'll give you great big fat salaries. I'll put you in apartments so gorgeous that any girl you meet will want to have sex with you immediately. I'll give you prestige. Just do one thing for me. Take this magazine you turn out once a year and turn it out once a month. So
wow.
the magazine in Boston was called the Lampoon, the Harvard Lampoon. And the magazine that Maddie put together was called the National Lampoon. And it basically became a foundational element for the comedy of the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s, complete with films. And who did Maddie want to do the art direction on this magazine? Me and my studio. So I brought this job, which involved a great big fat paycheck every single month, back to the studio. Now, remember the artist whose work was nauseating? He got together with the other artists in the studio and said, why don't we get rid of Bloom? If we get rid of Bloom, we can take over his percentage of the money. But what he was really after wasn't the money. He wanted to art direct this magazine. And remember, his work was nauseating. So they kicked me out of the studio. And I was now free of having a studio. And one day I was covering, but I didn't know what I was going to do next. So one day I was covering a parapsychology convention, you know, mind readers and spoon benders and things like that. And I had a pad in my left hand, because I always had a pad in my left hand, and a pen in my right hand. And I was scribbling notes like crazy because I have the memory of a decorticated frog. And if I don't write interesting things down, when I see them, I will never remember them in a million years. And articles are made of interesting things. So I'm busy scribbling away, and this kid walks up to me, and he says, would you like to edit a magazine? Now think about that. How often in life does that happen?
Yeah.
And I said yes, because remember, I'd written for the Boy Scouts of America despite being thrown out of the Boy Scouts. And I felt that if I had access to the research materials and really a love for my audience in my heart, that I could write about absolutely anything. So he gave me an appointment. Now, these days, as soon as you get an appointment with somebody and you get his name, you look him up on Google. We couldn't do that in those days. Phones were still wired to the walls and didn't do anything but operate as telephones, for God's sakes. We had no way of looking up a person we had a meeting with. So I went to this absolutely phenomenal office with 7 windows. It's one UN Plaza, which is on the UN property, overlooking the river, with a view 2 miles up the river and 2 miles down the river. You could watch a boat go from 2 miles up to 2 miles down on its way to the ocean. And met with the publisher. And he said, well, the magazine is called Circus. And I thought, oh my God, I really don't like elephants and clowns, but if I love my audience and have access to enough research material, I can write about elephants and clowns. Because basically what I'd been doing in order to write for these magazines and do 175 articles just for one of them is getting up at 6 a.m, going naked to a Remington manual typewriter whose keys you had to hit with the force of a sledgehammer, writing for 2 hours, then putting on my Susan Harris clothes, my designer clothes, going into the office, building the art studio, coming back home, and sitting there at the typewriter until 11 o'clock at night with a pot of coffee. And I was getting tired. And I thought, if I edit a magazine, I can do my writing during the day and won't have to get up at 6 a.m. So I was determined to take the magazine, Judd, no matter what it was. And when I said elephants and clowns, he said, no. It's a magazine about rock and roll. Well, I knew nothing about rock and roll. Yes, my art studio had helped ABC's 7 FM stations move from top 40 into a brand new format that was a huge risk for ABC, that had been invented at Bard College by a bunch of hippies, called progressive radio, where if you wanted, the DJ could play an entire album from beginning to end, which was radically different from top 40. I mean, this was taking the hugest gamble in the world for ABC. And we did such a phenomenal job for them that they asked me to form an advertising agency just to handle them, which I didn't do because I didn't want to learn time buying. It was boring. So I'd been taught a little bit about rock and roll by the head of promotion for ABC 7 FM stations, but that was about it. And I was a novice. So I took the job, and I replaced 2 people. And when I left, it would take 5 people to replace me. And I started turning out this magazine single-handedly. My publisher gave me a challenge. He said, look, there are these 2 magazines in Europe. One's called Bravo, that's in Germany. One's called Salut les copains, that's in France. And each one sells 1 million copies. And Germany and France are each 1/5 the size of the United States. So if they can sell 1 million copies, that should theoretically mean you could sell 5 million copies of a rock magazine in North America. But the fact is, the biggest selling magazine in North America, the biggest selling music magazine, is Rolling Stone. And it only sells 250,000 copies.
Yeah.
So solve this problem for me. So for a year, I worked single-handedly turning out the magazine. And in my spare time, because I'm used to working all my waking hours, so in my spare time, I was taking apart these magazines, including Time magazine, because he wanted the magazine to read like Time magazine, like laboratory animals, as if they were guinea pigs on a lab bench, or fetal pigs. And then at the end of 10 months, I came back to him and I said, look, give me the sales figures for the magazine so I can run correlational studies. I mean, remember, I came out of science and Martin Gardner's mathematical games section in the Scientific American. And he said, no, I'm not giving my sales figures to anyone. Well, I finally convinced him to give them to me. And then I came back to him and I said, look, I have a new format for the magazine based on all this work I've been doing for the last year. And I guarantee you that if you switch to this format, even though it breaks every rule that you've ever used, that I will deliver you magazine sales. Now, that is a cheeky thing to say.
Very
I've
cheeky.
only said it like that many times in my life when I knew it. Sometimes you know something with absolute certainty, and I knew it. And we increased in sales 211% in the next 12 months. And he went from being a man of modest means living on 62nd Street and 2nd Avenue to being a man of immodest means living in an aircraft hangar-sized apartment overlooking the river. And that's how I got into rock and roll. But in order to do this successfully, I had to be like a Talmudic scholar, just studying rock and roll, period. I ate my lunches with the tuna fish sandwiches I made at home, sitting over New Melody or New Music Express and Melody Maker, the 2 leading music magazines from England, going over every single word, absorbing every single fact. And by the time I was finished, I was an expert on rock and roll. So that's how I got into rock and roll, by looking for the gods inside of us. And then after I take a breath in 1976, which was how many years later? It was about 3 years later, something like that. I ended up founding my own PR firm, and it would become the biggest PR firm in the music industry. And I would work with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, people like that.
So how, I have to ask, Howard, in all of this, how for you, how does atheism and music come together?
Well, the gods are a secular experience, and they're an experience of the passions, not just inside of us, but us resonating to a group. The gods arise when we sense a soul greater than ourselves emerging from the group itself, a group soul. And we become aware of that group soul. When I went to my first rock and roll concert as an editor of Circus Magazine, it was Fleetwood Mac at Carnegie Hall. And the place was packed, even though they didn't have Lindsey Buckingham or Stevie Nicks yet. So it was a dying blues band. Chicken Shack and Fleetwood Mac were 2 old blues bands that were about to die. And we got about 20 minutes into the concert. One of the things I noticed was walking into the hall, each of us was very aware of trying to look cool to the people behind us and the people on either side of us. And when we found our seats, we were equally aware of trying to look cool to the people around us and the people behind us. And then the lights went down on the audience, and the lights came up on the stage. And we ceased to feel our individuality. We became less aware of ourselves and more caught up in what we were seeing and hearing on stage. And so I experienced as an audience member what I had seen happening to my audience at the Park School of Buffalo when I was dancing on stage. We pooled together and had an experience of being a blob of common energy, reaching out to the figures on stage. But then a half an hour into the show, something happened, and the lights and sound were cut to the stage, and the lights went on over our heads. And we suddenly realized, oh my God, that sense of being part of a common entity, as opposed to our individual little packets of self, is about to disappear. We're about to lose it. And then Mick Fleetwood, who was about 6'4" and a string bean of a man, came down to the foot of the stage. Remember, Carnegie Hall was originally designed before there were amplifiers.
Right.
And he came down to the very foot of the stage, and he stuck his fist in the air and said, fuck it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to rock and roll. And he brought that common energy, as opposed to our individual selves, back to life again. And it came to life with twice the urgency it had had before, because of having overridden this shock, this barrier, this obstacle in the path. And I had been looking for the land where the gods are and where the forces of history arise. And suddenly I realized, here I am in the land where the gods are. I understand Mick Fleetwood's experience because I've been there on the stage. And now I'm understanding the audience experience when they were watching me. And here I am right smack in the middle of the transcendent experience I've been after since I was 12 years old. So rock and roll for me had a meaning that's missing in the music of today.
Yeah.
The people I helped create, I didn't create them, the people I helped reveal to their audience became icons. And they became icons because who they really were was something they shared with the public no matter what the risk. And by showing what was inside themselves, they gave a mirror to what was inside you that it had never had a form of expression before. And that's the job of a superstar, to give identity to people who feel they're alone and show them that they are not alone in their experience, that they're resonating to the same frequency of anywhere from 100 people to 100 million people around the world. And that basic role of the icon, to give meaning or expression, to be a tongue of the collective soul, is missing from music right now.
Back to look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before.
You got it. You got it, Roxy. So that's, I feel sorely the lack of this element of collective soul, this element of the transcendent, this element of self-recognition for a generation. Remember, every generation is radically different, especially these days. Every 5 years, there is a new technology that no baby has ever grown up with before. And the babies grow up with this new technology, and they don't experience the world in the same way that the kids 10 years behind them experienced it.
Yeah.
And you need these iconic mythic figures to express honestly what's inside of them, so they can reflect honestly the weirdness that's inside of others that isn't a weirdness at all. It's a generational experience. It's not an individual insanity. It's a fucking movement. And that is really the role of the superstar. And that has been lost in signing ginger ale sponsorships and automobile sponsorships and all kinds of things that are thoroughly irrelevant to this soul-to-soul transmission that music and entertainment are really all about.
Wow, Howard. Like so funny story. So my father, he's no longer with us, but he was a huge rocker, huge, massive rocker. And he loved Fleetwood Mac. And he recalled the time when I was growing up when Rolling Stone magazine almost never was.
Really?
And I guess that's a story that not too many people know. I guess that at one point Rolling Stone magazine may not have been. And just to think about that, with all of your work and all the collective work of all the artists and musicians that I've ever met, I'm a huge believer that you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. And so to look at that and just think, if it would have never have happened, wow, what if, that's crazy to think about.
So if I were still in music, if you came to me back in the days when I was the leading publicist in the music industry, I gave you a little speech and I said, if you're coming to me and you expect me to fashion an artificial mask and tell you that with this mask I will make you a star and sit here like a guy in a check suit with flicking a cigar, then you've come to the wrong place. If you're going to work with me, you have to understand that music is a communication of souls. It is a soul-to-soul exchange. It is not an exchange of pieces of plastic. It is not an exchange of downloads. It is not an exchange of money. It is an exchange of human souls. And if you're going to come to me, I'm going to spend a month studying you, studying everything you've ever written, every album cover you've ever put out, every interview you've ever done. And then I'm going to demand that I come out to see you in your environment. And I spend from anywhere from a day to 3 days without any managers, wives, intercessors, assistants of any kind. And I'm going to find the gods inside of you that make your music. And what do I mean by that? You're on an album deadline. You sit down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in front of a blank computer screen. You have to write a lyric. You can't write a lyric. You wonder how you've ever written a lyric in your life. And on a reasonably good day, by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a lyric in front of you. And once or twice in your life, there's a lyric in front of you so perfect that it feels like it wrote itself through you. My job is to find the gods inside of you that wrote that lyric. When you go on stage and you see the pupils of the audience widening, you see their faces melting, you have an out-of-body experience, you feel the energy of the audience going through you as if you were an empty pipe and being transmogrified around your head and flowing back to the audience again. You feel like you are a marionette, a puppet being danced on stage by forces you do not know. My job is to find the gods inside of you that danced you on stage. And everything we do is going to be based on those experiences. And I'm going to keep you true to those experiences. But guess what? You're growing. You're changing. Every year, who you really are, the core, the essence, the gods inside of you are going to change a little bit. So I'm going to come back every year and do this again so we can reveal the new gods inside of you, or the maturing gods inside of you to your audience. Because guess what? They are growing up too. And every new year that they enter is unknown territory. And they need to feel that they are not alone in groping their way through that territory. Wow. So that was my approach. I would love to see it at work in the entertainment industry again. There seem to be some really great entertainers out there, but they're being portrayed as pieces of plastic, as Barbie dolls.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what was happening so much is all the hard work, the essentially the hard work that everybody talks about is, I think, were the prime things that made it what it was. Now I don't get emotion from a lyric that was made by a couple button pushes. I feel like today's, and it sounds really bad, and I sound bad when I say it, but the millennial way of doing things has really kind of screwed up some of the older things.
Well, you make certain trade-offs. Once upon a time, Supertramp was huge in 2001. And I had the privilege of being given them as a client. And they were just absolutely wonderful. The music still cuts through all the other music around as something utterly unique today. And I was out at Rick Davies, he's one of the two founders of the band. And Rick Davies is the keyboard player.
Yep.
And Rick told me he was growing up in an industrial town in England. And there was a huge factory that made locomotives in that town. And you had to take an exam in 5th grade. And that exam determined whether you went on to the university track or whether you went on to the vocational track. And if you were on the vocational track, they took you for a visit to this huge, awful, horrible, hell-like looking factory, because that was your future. And Rick made it only onto the vocational track and was taken to this hellhole of a Dickensian factory and saw that as his future. Well, he worked like a madman at his music, at his keyboard, because that was his escape from this factory sentence. But then, and one year, I think it was probably 2000 or 2001, Supertramp were one of the biggest selling bands in the world, if not the biggest selling band. And the result was that every time any of them, went on to the big sprawling campus of A&M Records, their record company, people came out of their cottages to say hello. They were superstars. And then the next year, a band called Simple Minds came along. and all of a sudden, when Rick Davies or the other members of Supertramp went onto the A&M campus, they were ignored. But the crowds came out of the bungalows for Simple Minds. And Rick was bitterly resentful. He said, it took me 17 years to school my hands to play this instrument. And Simple Minds are using gimmicks. They're using computer equipment.
Synthesizers, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right, and whatever you call repeaters that'll repeat a common loop over and over again. And they've taken all the hard work out of it. Their music is soulless. Well, no, their music was not soulless. The new technologies meant that people who never would have had the opportunity to make music before, who could never have done with their fingers what Rick Davies taught his fingers to do, never, were able to take the music that was in their head and bring it to their audience. So the range of creative possibility had expanded so much that whole new cadres of people could enter music. And was the music in their head worth it? Was the music in their head of value? Of course it was of value. And making things easier, I mean, it's like saying, when I was a kid, in order to get from one place or another, you had to have 6 guys carrying you on a litter. And why don't we have 6 guys carrying us on a litter anymore? Why do we have a bicycle? Well, bicycles made the 6 guys carrying you on a litter was only possible for 1 person per nation. And the bicycles made it possible to move at an even greater speed for millions of people in a nation. So never complain, because the human soul has been liberated by technology, because we are told that technology shackles us and imprisons us and dumbs it down. No, it does the very opposite. It frees us. It expands the range of our possibilities. And it means that people who could never do creative things before, I mean, they were capable of doing it in their heads, but it never got out of the confines of their skull, can suddenly get those things into the real world where they can share them with other humans. And then it's not judged by how good your fingers are at playing piano keys. It's judged by how good the fucking music, the final product, is, and whether it reverberates in the souls of others.
Yeah. Wow.
So we've expanded the number of people who can make a contribution creatively from possibly 100,000, a tiny elite, to 1 billion.
Wow.
And there are still 6 billion who have amazing things going through their minds that they cannot share, because mere words will not convey them.
Wow. Howard, man, it has been the coolest hour. I think that I haven't been this enthused in a conversation in a long time. Like, I didn't even realize it was an hour. Like, so I really would love to have you back again. I would even love to chop it up with you some more about some other topics if you're up for it.
Well, that would be terrific. My only difficulty is that I run a group called the Space Development Steering Committee in the 9 o'clock slot on Monday nights. So I've had to turn that over to somebody else tonight. And keeping the thread of the group together is very, very important.
Of course. Well, we'll schedule a Zoom coffee or something someday. We'll get together and have a coffee or something.
Right. Okay. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for doing all that you do, all that you've done. And you've been such a creative driver to so many people. And I'm sure I'm already touching on things you already know. But thank you so much for being you and sharing some of your story with us and just doing what you've done for us. Because I don't think so many people know all of what you've done. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Antman. Thank you, Roxy. And Roxy, feel better. I wish you strength.
I think she's muted.
Yes, Roxy is muted.
Oh, yep, she is.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry. So thank you so very much for those kind words. And for all of our listeners, I went and put in the comments a documentary for you guys to check out of Howard Bloom. So please check him out. I've had the link scrolling across the bottom of the screen for the show. If you've not heard of Howard Bloom, you really have to go check him out because he's incredible, absolutely incredible. And thank you for being on the show tonight. We're happy to have you. It was a pleasure to talk with you tonight.
Well, thanks, Roxy. And hopefully, despite the bizarre hour, in other words, the conflict with my Space Development Steering Committee, we'll get to do it again and we'll pick up the story from where we left off.
Oh,
absolutely. Yes, definitely.
Okay, well, have a great night.
Thank you, Howard.
Strength, health, and joy.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, Howard. Oh, wow. Impressive.
Wow.
So the things that people know, they amaze me. You can meet somebody with such a vast amount of intellect and you wonder, like, how does all of this information fit into us? How do our brains work? And they even say, we only use a small percentage of our brains, but you always have these questions in the back of your head that's totally unexplainable, but you still ask them.
I would have never, honestly, you go into something, you always think about one side of it because that's your job, right?
Yeah.
And then you get into it and then you're like, whoa. All right, so for this, and this to have happened, for me to be able to do this, that happened. Whoa. And then just to think about the idea that if none of that would have never have happened, like if Howard would have never have dabbled in music or dabbled in writing or any of that, would those artists, would those people have succeeded the way they succeeded if not for just that one writing or that one? It's just, I don't know. I could go on all day, honestly.
The fact that he was able to collaborate between the science theory and he applied this technique towards the publicism and he made something out of that.
I'm right. And I think, in the grand scheme of things, I think that is where I would want to pick more, and find, I would want to pick that apart,
Oh, yeah.
But, all right, Roxy, you need to go to bed.
Oh, my goodness. I started feeling really, really yucky. So,
I've seen that.
To end the show. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. We'll see you guys next Monday.
Yep.
Yeah.
before we go, my phone died, but our show next week. Can you tell us, tell everybody what time to tune in and where to tune in?
Oh, yeah. So next Monday, we are going to be live right back here. We got a really fun, interesting new guest that we've been wanting to promote for a long time. We're going to be getting all that information out to you. Make sure you like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our Facebook group, because our Facebook group is going to be the first place that you get to see who this guest is going to be. So make sure you like, share, subscribe, join our RA Nation podcast group on Facebook. Myself and Roxy have been out of the loop for the last couple of weeks. A lot of family stuff, a lot of all kinds of health stuff. We're going to get back into it the new year. Once January kicks in, the whole new year, it's all bets are off. So buckle up, bitches. It's going to be fun.
There we go. Yes. So thank you for W4CY Radio, Talk 4 TV, and Music Familiar Productions, as well as Standout Serpents. We can't make this happen without all this collaboration happening. So thank you, everybody. Tune in next week and have a great week.
All right. See ya.